Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition of Index Office Hours. Today is the 1st of April, April Fool's Day. So I guess technology wanted to play a trick on us today. And this is Index Office Hours 201. Holy crap, that is so many episodes. We crossed the 200 mark. Abel was having connectivity issues. This is an April Fool's joke, exactly. I wish it was crafted on my behalf, but it feels like perhaps maybe Discord was trying to play a joke on me there. Anyways, we are here and we are going to get the show on the road. If anyone is new to Index Office Hours, this is the town square for Graph ecosystem participants to come together and discuss the most important and relevant topics for indexes. You know what I'm going to say next. As always, this is a conversation and we do love participation. Thank you everyone for participating in the conversation thus far and helping with the technical issues. We do appreciate you all. Just as a reminder, this is a session that's going to be recorded and posted onto public channels like YouTube. So if you are concerned about privacy, please bear that in mind. And with that, let's get into today's agenda. So as for the latest GRT IQ episode, there is Mickey actually here? She isn't here, but everyone knows Mickey. Mickey's amazing, and she showed up for the latest GRT IQ episode for 214. As many of you know, she is a senior engineer manager at Edgenode, and she's in charge of engineering operations and customer success. She's the lovely person who is on the other side of all of the customer responses. Her background is super interesting to me. Yes, definitely. Mickey's amazing. She's on the other side of all of the support requests and doing a fantastic job of making sure that the quality of service for all of the subgraphs are fantastic. And she was featured on the latest GRT IQ episode. I will message Nick about the links because there was a slight confusion there, so apologies for that. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Anna for our regularly scheduled report section.
Thank you, Ebo, and hello, everyone. Okay, so today on RepoWatch, starting as always with execution layer clients, we have had new releases for GET. So this is 1.15.7, which is a release that addresses some critical bugs that impact archive nodes databases, which include fixes for the log indexer that could lead to data loss and transaction pool issues. So for this one, all operators should update immediately to prevent operational disruptions. So very important to upgrade. Then we have a new release on Firehose Ethereum. This is version 2.11.4, which introduces improvements for logging deterministic failures in WASM modules and fixes module WASM log value for better accuracy. This is an important fix, but no immediate action needed. Then we also have a release from Arbitrum Nitro, and Matthew saying that Pinax has rolled out the latest Firehose Ethereum release, assuming with no issues. Thank you for letting us know. Then Arbitrum Nitro release number 354, which includes memory improvements for DAS and enhances express lane functionality that provides immediate results for submissions. It includes some important configuration changes for sequencers on Pectra that have been specified. And this is an important update, but no immediate critical issue. And we have tested this release without issues as well. Then we have a new release for Handel. This is 1.2.2, which includes minor improvements and optimizations over the previous release. And all operators may benefit from applying this update, but it's not critical for operations. And this is all I have. So nothing on consensus layer clients or GraphStack this week. So over to you, Juan.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, getting into Protocol Watch. First of all, forum governance as always. We have 4 updates to the latest GDRs. So that's the request for information about disputes. That includes GDR 29, 30, 31, and 32. 29 is the one that's a little bit more interesting than the others. The other 3 are actually just essentially the same ones as I think 26, 27, and 28, that the indexer made the same, mistake / malicious intent again. So it seems that there's going to be another slash on those three. But aside from that, 29 is quite interesting because it is an issue with POI that's being caused by an issue that seems to be deterministic on GraphNode, but it seems that the indexer is running a slightly outdated version of GraphNode, which seems to not coincide with the error that other indexers are seeing. So it's a little bit interesting, technically speaking. So if you are interested in POIs, POI discrepancies, and everything else, I would advise you to take a look at JDR29. And also, if you are indexing that subgraph in particular, it would be also super helpful to know, how you're doing in that regard. So yeah, pretty interesting topics. Forum research, there is no new updates since last.ioh. For the contracts repository, there's quite a lot of PRs that are essentially fixes from the latest round of audits on the Horizon code base. Again, if you're interested in the Horizon code base and all of the improvements, yeah, that's essentially a lot of things going on there, preparing, the last polishing steps. And for the network subgraphs, we don't have any new updates, although that essentially is we don't have any new releases, but we're working on the Horizon support for the network subgraph. That's pretty much it. So I'm going to be handing over to 𝗟𝗀
now. Let's not forget, we have the rotating, well, sorry, not rotating is the wrong word, reoccurring segment that 𝗨𝘀𝗀𝗃𝗀 and Kate are going to be running, which is about the upgrade indexer. However, you guys weren't around last week, so I'm not sure if there are updates this week, but if there are, feel free to take the mic.
Thank you, 𝗟𝗀. I don't know, Slim, if you want to hop on. I was out of office for a little while in the middle of March, but I wanted to just say thank you to all the indexers who reached out and who've been supporting these subgraphs. I saw some of messages in some of the particular chain channels about some issues some folks are having with setting up certain clients, so I'll look into helping with that. We were supposed to have rewards live for this second batch of chains, which consists of Sonic, Optimism Sepolia, Base Sepolia, and Chapel. It was just Sonic, Optimism Sepolia, and Base Sepolia. Because with Chapel, as well as Ethereum Sepolia, we're having some ongoing POI investigations. We had some determinism issues there. But Sonic, Optimism Sepolia, and Base Sepolia, we're hoping to have rewards live for those by the end of the week. I did post in the indexer channel, and so just keep updated there if you have any questions. Keep your eyes there too for some of those announcements. I'm not sure if Slim shared this or if this was shared more broadly, but it looks like Near and Solana were part of a previous batch or an upcoming batch of chains. And some of you did sign up to support those. It looks like those are no longer on the roster at the moment. If anything changes in that regard, I'll update you. But yeah, that's where we're at this time. So again, thanks everybody. And I also wanted to mention the last time that I was in 𝗨𝗨, we did talk about the ongoing issue that indexers are having with supporting subgraphs for Moonbeam. I just wanted to let everyone know that Marc-Andre 𝗨𝗪 reached out to me with some errors that he had. I was able to reach out to the Moonbeam team, and they took action right away. Gave some suggestions for Marc-Andre to work on to reproduce some errors. So we have an ongoing dialogue to see if we can get some solutions going for indexers. I know that 𝗨𝗪 is not the only one that's struggling to support Moonbeam. So just want you to know that we're working on that as well. So yeah, I think that's it for this week. I'll, like I said, announce when rewards go live for this next batch as soon as I can, and I'll keep everyone updated about the POI issues for Chapel and Ethereum Sepolia.
Fantastic. I believe that came from the conversation around Network Watch. So great to see that the Moonbeam team has been quite responsive there and working with indexers. So yeah, great updates. Thank you, Kate, as Matthew was saying. Fantastic. Okay, wonderful. Now we have the good fortune of having a recurring guest, Rem, who has been our guiding light when it comes to protocol economics. And he's back again with another session. So without further ado, Rem, feel free to take the stage.
Sure. So I've actually had my share of IT issues this afternoon, so it's not going to look quite as pretty as I hoped, but hopefully that won't stop us having a good conversation. Now, I'm going to quickly walk through a little bit of an overview of the context of where we are so far, just to make sure we're all starting from the same place. I'm not going to go into all of the details, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how some of the new plans are developing, some of the design details really for how issuance balancing works. But by the way, if anyone has any questions at any time, please do ask. And I realize I don't have the chat questions up. I'll try and get that up and watch that as well. Where's... There we go. Yes, indeed. April the 1st seems to have struck me in good style. Any questions before I start? Take that as no. I'll share this again. Unfortunately, yes.
We're just getting it set up right now, Moonboy. So it should be loading and visible.
So all you can see at the moment is a lovely graph, branding color, and a bit of stuff around it, because something went wrong in the last few minutes and I can't figure out what, and my screen size is not being picked up. But we're just going to try and ignore that. So when I first came and talked to you in January, I first talked about really the content of the post, and I'm not going to go into the details here, just a slight recap. I talked about the needs really of all the participants was the main focus, and there was the consumers, the providers, the gateway, contributors, delegators, curators, and sponsors. And sponsor, of course, was not really a role that we had named at that point, but actually it is something that, if you think of indexing payments or BIPs, as people seem to like to call it, even though we try and change the name, it's a person who's paying for indexing directly rather than it being indexing rewards. Then I came back, I think it was in February, and I talked more about what the proposal itself actually was, rather than the background discussing the needs. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but it basically came down to there being 3 goals, if you only remembered sort of the major points of it. There are probably 2 ways to think of it. There's either these 3 goals. The first was we needed to maintain the network balance. A lot of things were being done by the protocol. We need to maintain that balance, right? The balance between supply and demand, etc. We do need to, within that balance, enhance the incentive alignment to make sure that all of the work that the network is doing is aligned with and incentivized by what's actually creating value for our customers. Because if we don't do that, then we're not going to be successful as a network. And finally, we needed to sustain continuous improvement, right? We can't just think about right now. The way the protocol is being designed is so that it keeps going. And I mentioned this was probably one way you could have thought of the summary. The other was that if those were the goals, there were 3 design principles came out of it, right? We were going to build on synergistic open primitives. So all the things we build will be flexible and be, the intent is just like with data services, right? We're not trying to dictate it's just one data service on the network. If we design the primitives correctly, then the whole network fits together and supports a broader ecosystem. Yes, the second one was everything should be aligned with the consumer value ultimately being delivered, because if the network doesn't do that, then it's not going to be successful. We're not going to achieve our vision and our mission. And finally, I, as a protocol designer, and anyone else, don't feel we're in a position to pick any particular parameters in many scenarios. Take a cut from fees, for example, 10% curation cut. For some scenarios, that's too much. For other scenarios, it's too low. We really want the protocol to find the right balance through, or I should say, facilitate finding the right balance through the participants acting through self-balancing markets. Any questions on that? Oh. I've got this annoying thing. The last a bit of advertising thing. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Associated with this, there were kind of 6 parts to the proposal. They all fit together, but you can also think of them individually as these, right? So one was the issuance would be distributed ultimately as network payments and network rewards. Those would better serve the network rather than indexing rewards as they are currently. So there'll be a bit of a migration to that. We want to ensure that we efficiently balance the fee cuts to incentivize network value creation. I sort of touched on this a little bit before. Like I say, I'm not trying to go into the detail of these now. There will be an incentive for a sponsor. That's a person or entity that pays for indexing, to sponsor indexing at an appropriate level where supply is matching demand. Well, we should have a future session on that. I think that's quite an interesting topic in its own right, how that works. That also leads on to curation, the new curation mechanism using that sponsorship mechanism. So the curation was something that many people have noted in the past wasn't working so well, and we actually have a way of changing that based on using the sponsor role. Now this one will actually be the self-balancing issuance allocation based on 𝗨𝘀𝗲 proportions. To start doing any of this, we have to change something sort of quite fundamental about the network, where currently everything's just automatically going to indexing rewards, to something that starts balancing it across different uses as those different uses develop. And a little bit aligned with the point I said previously, that we don't really want to be setting a lot of parameters. I mean, there will certainly be some parameters, but the network should be able to find its own balance. And the way that balancing is going to work, and this is what I can spend a little bit of time talking through, is based on 𝗨𝘀𝗲 proportions. And final point was a taper subsidy based on external income to match network needs. So like I said before, it's actually the self-balancing issuance allocation part that I now want to spend a little bit more time on. I just wanted to make sure we all had a chance to reorient with where we are so far. Any questions so far? question coming up. Oh, no, that was just a thumbs up. Okay, now we're going to get to the stage where my relatively late attempt to prepare for this compared to a number of IT issues, which I think some of you indexers are probably more adept than handling than me, but I spent a few hours today trying to figure out what was wrong, rebooting things, my internet connection, everything, until I discovered that I have a switch that is broken, and everything plugged into that switch was acting weirdly. Anyway, I'm going to switch to now. I'm not sure you can see this. I need to switch the sharing here again. Let's share a new application. This is going to be me drawing it as we go. Now, which was not what I planned, by the way, but sometimes things don't happen as you plan. There are actually two different angles I was considering, and I might get a little bit of feedback and see what people are most interested in. Because on one side, although I'm a little less set up to do this because I did have diagrams ready for this, and quite involved, but they're not working. Is actually explaining logically how over time issuance itself changes from what we have currently to what we might have in 5 or 10 years' time, ultimately. And the other track, or the other path, is talking much more about the immediate change that I'm working on right now to start being able to change the way issuance works, and to start being able to actually do that in a quite iterative manner where we can run some small-scale pilots, observe how those pilots are working, etc., and before putting a lot of the before putting a lot of issuance through that mechanism, and then when we know it's working, start wider adoption. So by default, I'm probably going to. For a moment, it almost looked like Vince showing me live that he can draw better than I can, which is probably the case, as you'll soon see. Anyway, when we talk about issuance, as you, I'll start drawing as I speak now, right? We've got what currently happens, right? And let's call these indexing rewards. I'm not sure I'm going to do a lot of writing because that probably won't be that clear by the time it's not even clear to me. By the time it's on your screen, it's probably not very clear at all. But there's a certain amount of issuance annually, right? It's about 317 million GRT, and all of that is going into indexing rewards. And what's actually happening is that there is a certain amount of curation. see if I can write just simple words and you can read them. Curation, right? So we've got certain blocks of curation, and out of that, we have what I'll call a total, I don't have space to draw it there, let me just say signal. So essentially I'm part of the reason for explaining this pattern is this pattern happens at multiple levels and it'll keep happening at other levels. So if I start talking about more technical details and we don't have a shared understanding of this, then it's probably not going to be a conversation you can all participate in. What happens is each thing you curate on effectively creates what we call a signal, right? So there's a certain amount of curation signal. And we add up all of the curation signal for everything, and you can think of that as the total signal. And then that issuance pool is being divided in proportion to how much signal there was on a particular subgraph versus how much signal there was overall. And the same pattern happens multiple times, because what happens with what was allocated to the slice here, now the signal is in effect the amount of total allocation on that subgraph, and it gets divided according to the individual allocations, right? So this pattern happens multiple times. We have a certain amount of signal that's dividing something up. We take the sum of all the signal on it, and therefore everything that is distributed can be in proportion to that. Hopefully I've made that reasonably clear despite my not particularly good diagram. Now what we're going to do, the plan is, you can see there's this sort of almost stages of splitting up. But we now need to add a step in front of this and say, okay, starting with our total issuance pool, let's call it. We want that to balance between different mechanisms, one of them different mechanisms or different purposes. One of them, of course, is treated as indexing rewards for now. That itself is going to evolve over time, but that is one of the buckets that we have. But we will also be introducing other buckets. And the way we want to do that is still based on 𝗨𝗀𝗄𝗳, right? And the reason for that, from my perspective, and to be open, there are other suggestions on the table. So I am discussing. Sometimes people say, "Oh, should it be just a certain percentage, etc." At the moment, from my perspective, the solution that I'm working on and promoting is based purely on 𝗨𝗀𝗄𝗳. And I think that's a very powerful way of doing it, because it means the people who actually have a stake in the network are controlling the network, rather than someone external to the network dictating how how things change. But how do we make this split? Was the key question. And actually, let me stop, because I'm aware I've done a little bit of talking. I'm not sure if it's making sense or not, because I can't see any feedback from anyone, or if you have any questions.
A few people typing, but I'll say that okay, Matthew's saying okay for me. I like the diagrams, I like the visual element, and I like the real-time nature of all of this as well. But yeah, keep going. This is great. Anyone have any questions? Yeah, Pili saying good for me as well. No questions from Pili. Anyone questions, or yeah, if not, then we can keep going.
Yeah, good. Because look, this is what we'd do if we were in a room together, right? Anyway.
Exactly, yeah.
You might have noted the amount of curation, it's in the region of 7 million compared to well over 2 billion, 2.2, 2.3 billion of combined indexer self-stake and delegation. So if this was based purely on curation and we had this, let's say this is 7 million, it would be actually really easy for someone to come along and put in 70 million and dwarf this, right? That would not be an appropriate balanced way of the network responding. So we're not going to do that. So let me get rid of those. But if we look at all of the stake that is actually locked, and I'm using locked pretty much in a pretty broad sense of any participant locking their stake for a network purpose. So I'm not including what there's a slight edge case of there's some stake locked investing contracts over time, right? That's not what this is about. This is about actually the stake that's locked in terms of directing the operation of the network. And in here we actually have, I'll just say, whoops, there is stake. Let's make, so this is self-stake. Plus there's delegation. And I'm going to in brackets call old curation. But that's basically the curation we've got at the moment. And if you add up all of this, obviously this is more like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but let's say this is more like 2.2 billion. Now, if someone puts 70 million in here, actually, that's going to be a pretty small proportion. And that's more the direction I'm heading at the moment. That the locked stake that counts towards this bucket here, that is our current indexing rewards, is actually the calculation will be slightly more sophisticated than this and still subject to revision, but essentially not very different from being the amount of self-stake plus the amount of delegation plus the amount of curation that is dedicated to this. And then, if you like, this will have a signal of 2.2 billion, whereas this would only have a signal of 70 million if someone came along using the new curation mechanism and curated on this. And I mean, 70 million is not a trivial amount of GRT to be dealing with, but you'd have to be, you can actually see, that would be, well, that'd be just about but I don't know, 3% is my rough mental reckoning. If you were, instead of 70 million to take 110 million, well, the maths won't slightly add up. It'll still be slightly less than 5% at that stage, right? And that's a reasonably significant amount of GRT to come up with. Now, I want to, if people have questions about that, I can go a bit deeper, but that's probably enough at this stage to understand the concept and to be able to put the other things in context. I then want to talk a little bit about how this happens. Okay. Sounds like everyone's happy-ish with that. I'm going to see if I can delete some of this stuff. Also not too dissimilar to being in front of a whiteboard together, is it? At the moment, we have an existing a set of existing contracts, right? And one of the key ones here is a rewards manager. And what we're probably going to do from an implementation point of view is add a new contract in front of the rewards manager that looks at the total signal and allocates or slices the issuance to other mechanisms or controlled by other contracts. So the existing rewards manager will, and I don't know how many indexes actually get very close into the details of how of what the contracts are and how they work. I imagine there are a few that do, but it's probably not essential for being an indexer. So I imagine there are also a lot that don't. Issuance availability oracle. Actually, issuance availability oracle. I'm not sure how to parse that, but I'll have an attempt. I don't think we need an oracle for this, and I think it would be quite problematic if we did need an oracle for this. The way the current mechanism works in the rewards manager is probably largely a pattern that we would repeat. And what happens essentially is that each time there is a change to an individual signal, right? Each time someone might curate on a new subgraph or change their curation or withdraw their curation, etc., we then take a snapshot of all of the rewards that would have been earned up to that point, whether they've been distributed yet or not. And then we add, and then we make whatever change there is to that individual signal, and then we can form a new total for the new signal and carry on from there. That probably doesn't really make it's probably not something I want to go into too much detail. But basically, that pattern would repeat. We don't need an oracle. It's all calculated on chain. So actually, currently, each time that someone curates, a calculation like this happens, and it happens at that point in time. Now, Chris asked about veto curation. So I'm not sure if this is the answer, but was one of the things I was going to start talking about, which feeds into that, which is actually, while the existing indexing rewards mechanism is established, we will now be adding the ability to curate on new mechanisms. But this will not be initially a perfectly permissionless free-for-all system where anyone can create a mechanism. We will have a layer of governance on top of this and be proposing to the council essentially, look, we want to enable this mechanism for this purpose. These are the safeguards on it. These are the limits within which we think we should operate. Those will be time. It'll also initially be a maximum amount that we are prepared to, of issuance that we're prepared to use for that purpose, etc., because we want to constrain it and start on a small scale. So the top level distribution contract, if you like, that operates at this level will have a governance controlled whitelist of which mechanisms, essentially which contracts or addresses issuance is allowed to be directed to, and some limits on what the maximums might be for some of the new limits. So there's no veto. So I'm not sure, Chris, if that answers your question about veto curation or not. It might mean something different, but it was probably a useful piece of context. Anyway, I'll start answering Vince's question. I might come back to. Oh, I see. Yes. I think the reality is that in the interest of doing things quite quickly for our collective interests, we won't yet be having the most sophisticated of mechanisms in that sense. So might be consideration of that in the future. Okay, so Vince asks, what type of mechanism will be used for future services? Surely curation won't exist, a flat price. So let me answer that in reverse. So as I see it, curation will exist, a new form of curation, and that curation is essentially performing a role which in some ways you could say similar in terms of the network, or directing where the issuance should flow. So curation, a new form of curation, will exist for this, and to make this mechanism work, it's actually a very simple mechanism. We don't even need the full sponsorship model yet, which was introduced in the proposal. I can talk about in a future session. It is just generating some signal saying, okay, some issuance can flow for this purpose. And what type of mechanism will be used for future services. Okay, so there are a few potential things that we would start with. And these will definitely start as pilots from my perspective. And they relate if you remember. Let me try and make space on the screen here. So we've got this intent that indexing rewards will migrate to a combination, what we call, I dare to try and write, network rewards and network payments. And probably the first pilot saw, actually it's not quite true. There can be pilots in both areas. But one of the components of network payments will be paying for indexing through in the form of indexing payments. So currently the network's not doing that, obviously. We're in the process of actually rolling out indexing payments. Currently, to do indexing payments, it needs to be, another party needs to do it, right? It's not sourced from issuance. But we would want to run a pilot initially saying, okay, for a small amount of issuance, and this will be for a small amount of issuance, can we effectively direct that issuance to make indexing payments for indexing that is useful to the network? Oh, I see a few more questions. I'm just going to quickly read. So curating on a RPC, if that counts, for example. Maybe the rest of it first. That doesn't seem like a good fit and manual work for the network. Wouldn't network rewards issuance not even be involved? I.e. people pay, it goes to providers per request or something like that. I'm not sure quite understand that question, Vince. Do you want to add a little bit more?
Yeah. I was just saying, like, for instance, if we have, like we have the token API or RPC, or we add these kind of services, something in those realms, like, wouldn't issuance and curation not even be involved, and more so, you're a person is paying for an RPC, it's hitting whatever providers it needs to hit, and those providers are getting paid per block of requests or whatever the person's paying for, similar to how, like, you pay for alchemy, like you get so many CUs and then it costs this much, and if you use this many CUs, and network issuance not even be involved in the equation of, like, something like someone paying for RPC.
Yeah. So yeah, let me, and I'm actually aware we're very close to the end of time. So start thinking if there are any final questions, because I'm going to try and wrap up rather than add more. But if you think in terms of the question that Vince is asking, the whole use case of curation, and not just curation, but the issuance that is being used for indexing rewards is to make the network ready to provide a service. Right. So if you're providing a service that doesn't need preparation, right, it doesn't need indexing, etc., then that's not something you would use any of these mechanisms for, because this is what I sometimes broadly describe as being capability building, right? If you're building a capability for the network so that it's able to serve consumers on demand when necessary, that's what issuance is intended to. Okay, so I'm not seeing any extra questions at this time. Tell me if I've missed something. I'm aware I'm basically at end of time, so Oak was asking, can you provide some examples of the other destinations for issuance, other data services, on-chain distribution mechanisms? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I will say that some of the main categories are the replacement for indexing rewards, like network payments and network rewards. The other one that often comes up is curation on the knowledge graph. So this has a completely different shape, if you like. It's different to what you think of as an indexer, but to create content essentially on the knowledge graph is one of the other key categories. Now, I think there are a few other areas that might be quite small, maybe in terms of the amount, the slice they would take. I think even long term, but maybe still important, like oracles or providing a free tier which enables anyone to start using, encouraging a lot of people to start using the graph network and make it easy for people to use. So oracles, the free tier, and in general, if there are some form of public goods that we want the network to, we think it's appropriate for the network to provide. And just in case that sounds in itself too abstract, for example, there might come a point in the time, point of time in the future, I don't think we're at the stage of assessing this yet, that we look at the way subgraphs or anything else on the network is being indexed, and to maintain a level of economic security in the graph, we want to ensure there's a certain amount of independence still in the way in the indexing that's performed, for example. So we might identify areas that might be key. I mean, an example might be the network subgraph or network subgraphs, for instance, because they are critical for the entire network. We're not expecting any individuals or entities to necessarily sponsor those subgraphs. They're just foundational. We need them for the good health of the network. Well, with that, thank you for your. It looks to me like you are all listening intently. I can't really tell, but I got some good questions. But but thank you for that. I'll hand it back.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rem. Yes, people were certainly listening intently and also sharing great questions. So thank you, everyone. Hopefully this was insightful for you guys. Pelly has posted the POAP code, so don't forget to grab that. Thank you, Rem, for taking the time to draw out all of these diagrams and make it very interactive, and make sure that you're constantly opening yourself up for questions. That's yeah, as you say, you know, as if we were in the same room. So really do appreciate that. Okay, that is it for IOH today. Thank you all for attending, and we will see you again same time next week for another edition of Index Office Hours, hopefully with a team externally, Rootstock, joining us to tell us all about their chain. So we look forward to seeing you all again next week. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.